Good afternoon and welcome to my channel. I'm Beth and this is Watercolor Painting in the Afternoon. And welcome to the second lesson for ultra beginners in watercolor. If you are a beginner, I'm just doing, I know I said I didn't do lessons really, but I'm just doing a few for a friend who asked me to give her some lessons, and I thought I'd go ahead and put them on video as well as work with her. So today's lesson is about how much water to use when you're messing around with your watercolors or when you want to paint. I got my little palette, my messy palette. I really do need to clean it off here. But I'm just going to use what's on here for now to show you some things about how much water to use when painting with watercolors. So I just have my jar of clean water here and my number, let's see which brush this is. This is my number 10 round Princeton Aqua Elite. It holds a good amount of water. So if I get it nice and wet, it's going to hold plenty of water so that I can wet down whatever paint I want to use, and it'll do a good job. So let's start out by maybe mixing a little bit of this peacock blue. I've already got some green on the palette, and maybe a little of this bright yellow, which I'm just going to call a lemony yellow. I don't know what yellow that is exactly. And you'll see that your paint's going to have a certain consistency. It looks pretty thin, doesn't it? This is actually a fairly thin consistency of paint. If I want it thicker, more paint, less water. That just makes sense, right? Now it's a thicker consistency. And this is about a medium consistency right here. So let's make it a nice thick consistency, which is going to look almost like, oh gosh, it's going to look almost like butter. You know, it's going to be so thick and creamy, right? That's a thick consistency of paint. Now let's play with it a little bit and just see what happens. With our thick consistency of paint, we're going to get a nice dark finish. So here's a leaf, a basic leaf. A little pressure, a lot of pressure, and then pick back up. Basic leaf, I'm going to make another half of this leaf just like this. Same way. Okay, and that's a relatively thick consistency. It could have been even thicker. I'm going to add a little paint to it so it comes out nice and dark. That's a thick consistency. Suppose we put a little more water in this paint. What are we going to come up with? This is a fairly light, thin consistency, so I'm going to make it a little bit thicker just to play with it. You have to just play with them. You know, you have to play with them a little bit until you get it the way you want it. Okay, so that's about a medium consistency. It's just enough to make an opaque looking puddle, but you can still see through it. So let's do another leaf in this medium consistency. Look at how much lighter that is. That's actually, you know, I think some people would call that almost a light consistency, wouldn't they? So there's your medium consistency, and you can see that it's actually changed color a little bit. It's not quite as dark, and it's certainly not going to dry as dark. Now let's do a thin consistency. And I think it's really important, if you're going to do a thin consistency, you have a lot of water, to be sure that you dab your brush off a little bit before you put it to paper. Because if you don't, you're just going to be making a watery, puddly mess. So just dab off some of that excess water, and then we're going to make another leaf with this thin consistency. And look how light that is. Definitely a thin Consistency. Again, I'll just let some of it puddle. I really like the way it looks when you get some little puddles in your leaves. It makes them look a little bit more authentic and real. But those are the three consistencies. Very nice, thick, dense consistency, medium, and a very light consistency. And of course, anything in between, anything and everything in between. You're going to achieve things that are very dark and saturated and maybe even a little bit opaque, or you can achieve things that are light and bright and very translucent. So let's do it with a different color this time. And I'll just make perhaps red. We'll get a very dark, thick consistency of red by just really scrubbing that paint onto the brush. I don't want to damage my brush, but we can scrub it on there. And I'll make a rose. I'll make a cute little rose here. To make a rose, you start with some C curves. This is a little abstract rose, okay? It's a little C curve and another little C curve right in the middle. And then press down a little bit more and make some more C curves so that you're going around the outside of the flower. Be sure you connect the C curves a little bit so that it looks like it's all a part of the same flower. You don't want too much white space, but you don't want too little either. Okay, there's a nice dense rose. I don't know if it looks like a rose to you or not, but that's what it's supposed to be. Now let's try it with a medium consistency of red. So I've got more water in it this time, and I'm going to do the same thing again. A C curve and another C curve, and then start getting bigger with the C curves. And yes, we do want to connect them a little bit. We're just forming these loose petals around the flower, around the outside of the flower. Now we're going to start smishing more as we go further out until we've got the flower as big as we want it. Now that's very loose, okay? And one of the things that you'll notice is that it looks a little bit lackluster. Actually, I have a little bit of paint right there that crumbled off. It looks a little bit lackluster. And the way to solve that is to make the center more dense. So we're going to take some of this dark red paint and we're just going to, while it's still wet, we're going to touch the center of the rose. Just the center part of the rose to make it look like the petals are denser in the middle. And then we can just kind of come out a little bit with the suggestion of some petals. And that looks a little bit better. Now we're going to make a super light rose. So this is going to require lots of water. What do we say, right? When you do a lot of water, dab your brush off a little bit because otherwise you get puddly messes. So maybe that's a little too light. But you can see it, I think. I'm just going around the flower with my C curves, making my petals bigger and bigger as I go. This is a very subtle pink rose, and it's all made out of the same color. All made out of the same color. You don't have to have 10 different colors for your roses, and you don't have to have white. Now, I have no problem using white. I know a lot of people really object to using white in watercolor. I'm going to put some more color right there in the center of the rose, like I did before, and make that a little bit more dense. Make it look a little bit more like the middle. And that'll fade out as it dries. That'll spread out a little bit. If you want to take paint up, then just dab off your brush and touch wherever you want to pull paint out. And it'll soak it right up, especially if you do it while it's still wet. If you do it while it's dry, it's not quite as effective. But you can see here the difference between these three roses. It's a huge difference. You have one that has a lot of paint, on it in a very thick consistency, a medium consistency, and a light consistency. And no, those are not the most beautiful roses in the world, but they do kind of prove my point, I think. You can just make your leaves coming out this way. You can make them very abstract like that, or you can pull and make them smooth like this. Some roses have little points on them. Okay, so I had to go refresh my water. It gets dirty pretty quickly. The last thing I want to talk about when you're painting, now this is not the best cotton paper that I have, and so water really makes a bigger difference here than it does perhaps on a good cotton paper. Whatever your consistency is, so you're going to make a wash of some sort. You want it to have the right amount of water on the paper. It should glisten a little bit without puddling. And the reason, if you can see this, I don't know if you can or not. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit and make that crisp and bright. Can you see the line that happened right here? That's from the very loose watery paint. And because you see the little puddle, if you have that little puddle and you don't have paper that absorbs that paint well, then what you're going to do, what you're going to end up with is a little line around the edge of your leaf. And it can be a cauliflower looking line like this one is, or it can be just a dark line. But whatever it is, you don't want it, and you want to try to avoid it. The best way to avoid that is to use a decent paper. But I can't always afford that expensive paper. So I end up doing things like this, which is coming back and trying to fix things that have gone wrong. So if you can afford that paper, go ahead and get it. If you can't, then just be a lot more careful about how much water you leave on your paper. This one is already dry. There is no water line because I dabbed that excess water out. So that's just something to keep in mind. And I got the water just right on this one too. There's no line. No line here. All right. Well, that's my quick lesson about how much water to use when painting. Be sure you're not getting a puddle. That's the main thing. Be sure you're not getting a puddle. I'm going to make a puddle here for you to see what it looks like. I hope I can. Can you see in the light there just how much water there is in that? Okay, that's way too much water. And you can put paint in it, sure you can. But it's going to make a visible outline. And it's not going to look good when you're done. I'm going to let that dry and let you see it when it's finished drying, and you'll see what I mean. All right, and since it's pretty warm here in South Carolina, I just took the page out and I set it in the sun, and it dried in about 10 minutes. All that water is evaporated, but you can see there's a very dark line around the circle, and there's this what we call cauliflower effect. That's what happens when there's too much water on the page, and especially on paper that's not a really high quality 100% cotton paper. So this is 100% cotton, it's just not a real high quality, and it's not absorbing the paint in the same way that, say, Arches or a really good Fabriano or Academy paper would do. And you know, you've got here, you can see, I don't know if you can or not, I hope so, but you can see maybe some dark lines around the edges. So you've got, the cheaper the paper, the harder it is to get the effect you want. But I get it. I don't have that kind of money either. So today, these are the things that we were looking at. We were looking at how much water you need to make your watercolor painting look good, right? Have the effect that you want it to have. And it really does depend on how much water you put in your paint, how much water is on your page, and how thick the consistency of the paint is. I hope that you have enjoyed this very short mini lesson, and I hope that you'll join me again. And Chris, I hope you got something great out of that. See you next time.